Fun with History with Professor Banks. This week, we're gonna do the big 80s. So please, welcome everybody, Professor Banks.
Thank you, my friend Scooby, and welcome to Fun with History. I don't know if you caught that, but that was a trend in the 80s. What I was doing there, or what I was attempting to do, was the moonwalk. And that was a very popular dance move that was created by a pop icon and Michael Jackson. So that is a little something to get us going today. And thank you, Scooby-Doo, for introducing me. We had our friend Scooby-Doo in an old video of mine way back at the beginning, and I said I would bring him back again. And so I brought him back as my introduction, as him introducing me. So welcome. And this is Fun with History with Professor Banks. And today, we are on Fun with History number 31. And this week it's called The Big 80s Part 1. So, are you ready to dive into the 80s? Let's do it. Let's get our music going here, shall we? Welcome to Fun with History with Professor Banks. And today, let me move the globe over a bit. There we go. So today, we are going to dive into the 80s. So welcome to Fun with History. And today, we're going to take a look at the 80s. We're going to split it up into 2 weeks because there's a lot I want to cover in the 80s. So let us just start here at the beginning of the 80s. First, you like my costume here? What I want to introduce you to here is a little history about me, okay? A little history about me that relates to the 80s. So, I was going to public school when I was in the 80s. That was what the 80s was for me. I was going to public school. And I'm excited about going into the 80s because this is really the first history that I remember. This is really the first stuff I start to remember in my mind because of my age. So, what I got here is I got a bunch of... I kept my public school t-shirts, if you can believe it. So I want to introduce you to each one, okay? So, what I got here is Prince Charles Chargers. Yeah. I went to Prince Charles for the first 4 years of my public school life. I loved Prince Charles. I had two really best friends in those years I went to Prince Charles. And they were known as the Prince Charles Chargers. So I went there for the first 4 years, and then my mom decided to move, and so obviously I had to move too. So we moved to a different part of town, which meant changing schools. So, after 4 years of being a Charger, I officially became a Longhorn. So this is the Lord Elgin Longhorns. And I went to Lord Elgin for 2 years for grades 5 and 6. And if you could believe this, this is a little fact for you. In grade 6, I actually had a teacher. My teacher in grade 6 was Mr. Banks. No short of a lie, Mr. Banks. So Professor Banks had Mr. Banks in grade 6. And then it only went up to grade 6 at the time, Lord Elgin. So in grade 7, I went over and I joined this school. And I don't want to spend a lot of time on this school because this was by far the worst year of my life. This school was awful. It still is, even to this day, I think. But the school was full of bullies. And I got bullied badly in grade 7. I hated it. I often came home in tears from school. Sir John A. Macdonald. I don't want to talk much about them, but that is where I went in grade 7. My mom was worried about the bullying that was happening that year, so we weren't going to go there for grade 7. Instead, what we did in grade 8 for my last year of public school is I decided, since I was pretty good in French, parlez-vous anglais? Bonjour. Comment ça va? Well, anyway, I was pretty good in French, so I decided to go to this brand new French immersion school in grade 8. And that is where I went in grade 8, and this was Jean Sauvé. So there's my Jean Sauvé shirt from grade 8. And I loved grade 8. It was a great time of my life. I could have not went from one extreme to the other. I went from that grade 7 to such a great school in grade 8. I had a great teacher. We had a great year. Everybody that was in grade 8 that year was brand new to the school, so it was we all were all starting on the same front. So that is a bit of my public school education, all right? Now, let me get into the joke of the week, okay? So here we go. I didn't have a joke last week, and I promised you one this week, so I'm going to give you one, okay? And ironically enough, this joke is all about the 80s. So it fits in beautifully to the topic of the big 80s. Okay? So, this is 88 ways to know you're stuck in the 80s. But I'm not going to go over all 88. I'm just going to go over some, okay? Hope this brings back some memories for some people. 88 ways to know you're stuck in the 80s. You relax by putting on your leg warmers and dancing to the Footloose soundtrack. Yeah, Footloose. I have that movie. I love that movie. I love the music from that movie. Awesome. Punky Brewster is your hero. And Pippi Longstocking might be your hero too. You type all of your term papers on a Commodore 64. Yeah. The only video games you play are Frogger and Pac-Man. 3 words. Madonna and MJ. MJ is Michael Jackson, of course. You still have a shoebox full of Garbage Pail Kid cards. Remember the Garbage Pail Kids? Yeah. I remember them. You write your congressman if you're living in the States and ask him to introduce a bill to make Born in the USA the national anthem. Born in the USA, I was born in the USA. Yeah. You still practice your Care Bear stare, I should say. Care Bears. Yeah, I watched them too. They were pretty cool. You know that girls just want to have fun. Yeah, girls just want to have fun. And on another musical note, you can do the safety dance. And on another musical note, you know whose number is 8675309. 8675309. Jenny, you're the girl for me. Anybody ever try calling that number and seeing if Jenny was there? Yeah, I don't think you'd probably get Jenny at that number. Another one, you still watch videos on beta. Your favorite game, your favorite party game is, and I got it right here, Hungry Hungry Hippos. Yeah. How many people played that when they were younger? Yeah, and you know what? It's come out again in the last year. It has come back to the market. So this is Hungry Hungry Hippos. So I bought it again just because I like playing it. And here's another game that you might know of too. I loved it as a kid and I bought it again too. Mr. Mouth. Mr. Mouth. That's a fun game too. Okay, let's carry on. You go on your computer to something called the World Wide Web that was born in 1983. You saw New Kids on the Block when they were Tiffany's opening act. You know which Hollywood square Jim J. Bullock was in. You're still wondering who really was the boss. You still drink New Coke. And here's another person from the 80s. This is another way you know you're stuck in the 80s. Look at this guy here. Alf. And you know Alf's real name. I know Alf's real name. Do you? Yes. If you answered Gordon Shumway, you would be correct. Everything in your wardrobe is either pastel or fluorescent. You're planning a dream vacation to Meepos. When you're stuck in traffic, you tell your car to engage turbo boost and surprise when it doesn't talk back. E.T. E.T., Raiders of the Lost Ark, Return of the Jedi all make millions at the theaters. You can feel St. Elmo's fire burning in you. And finally, you can watch NYPD Blue thinking, wow, they're no Crockett and Tubbs, that's for sure. That goes out to my mom. My mom was a big fan of Miami Vice in the 80s. So, that is a little joke, a little funniness on the 80s. I wanted to also mention, I have failed to mention this in my last two videos. I keep forgetting, but quick, good reference guide. Number one, the TV show The Wonder Years. Anybody ever watch that? I loved The Wonder Years too. Well, The Wonder Years is a great TV show showing the late 60s and early 70s. So if you like comedy and you like history, especially that time period, the late 60s, early 70s, you should watch The Wonder Years. And I also want to make a reference to a movie that is a very excellent movie I saw in the last year called The Butler. Okay, so if you want a movie that really gets into the American Civil Rights Movement, highly recommend that movie, The Butler, okay? And a current show that's on TV right now that me and my wife are a fan of is called The Goldbergs. And The Goldbergs is a funny show, at least I think it is. And that show is all about the 80s. So if you want to take a dive back into the 80s, watch The Goldbergs. It's on Wednesday nights. So, okay. So there is our joke of the week. And it wraps up, it goes beautifully with our lesson on the 80s, okay? So that is 88 ways to know you're stuck in the 80s. Okay, so what I want to do here first is I'm going to get into a little bit of the 80s here, okay? So first, what I want to talk about is what's happening when we enter the 80s. Well, what's happening when we enter the 80s is, unfortunately, not a lot of good things. We got double-digit unemployment happening. That's what we got going on. We got high inflation, and we got communism expanding its influence, okay? So this communism thing obviously was going on since the end of World War II, but now we're in the beginning of the 80s, and it is definitely expanding its influence, okay? Where? Where, you might ask, Professor Banks? Where? Okay, I'll tell you. Poland, Albania, Bulgaria became communist pretty much right after the war. And then you had Romania, Czechoslovakia, East Germany, and Hungary that followed suit in 1949. And where it was spreading its influence now in the early 80s, it's getting into some parts of Africa. And even France, for a very tiny bit, was under communism influence. And this was under the president Francois Mitterrand, okay? He was the president. This was 1987. Actually, not 1897, sorry. I'm looking ahead to another note. But Francois Mitterrand was the president of France, and while he was in power, communism kind of reigned there for a short time. Obviously, it didn't reign there long. France is not a communist country, but it did for a bit. Okay, and now today, to this day of age, communism isn't dead today. It's not dead, because we still have communist countries out there, and these are the ones I'm talking about. China, Laos, Cuba, North Korea, and Vietnam. Okay, even to this day, they are still all communist. So, communism has not totally gone away, but it's not... The influence of it is not nearly what it was to begin the 1980s. Okay? So, that's what's happening as we come into the 80s. Another thing that's a big thing that starts in the 80s, 1981, we have a virus that is identified and is still a big issue in this day of age now, and that virus is the AIDS virus, okay? So the AIDS virus comes onto the world scene in 1981. If anybody, probably everybody knows what that is, but it's short for Acquired Immune Deficiency Syndrome. And you usually only, it's not like something that you get without trying, I guess, but it's usually it's quite easily transmitted with unprotected intercourse with another person, and you can get it pretty easily if you're a drug user and using needles and sharing those too. Definitely was a big thing over in Africa. Africa seems to be the area where a lot of these viruses tend to be a problem for some reason, but AIDS comes out in 1981. Okay. Now, what I want to also talk about is staying on tune with Africa here. Okay, so Africa. Now let's look at Africa here, okay? Here we are, Africa. There's Africa for you. Okay? So, where I'm going to go here is Ethiopia. You can see Ethiopia there, I'm sure. So, in the 80s, Ethiopia had a pretty bad famine. Okay, huge famine going on in Ethiopia. This was from 1983 to 1985. And what had happened was, before this famine, it was preluded by a civil war. Okay, so that didn't help matters at all in Ethiopia. They had civil war before this happened. But after a civil war, they had a drought. And then the drought aided to killing crops and killing things that were important for food. So, big famine happened in Ethiopia. It was huge, very huge. In fact, over 400,000 deaths as a result of this famine in Africa during this time. And thankfully, the world noticed, and the world tried to help these poor people. And what they did was, or one of the big things they did was they had something called a Live Aid concert. It was held in Philadelphia and London, and a lot of bands came together and said, listen, we're going to have a Live Aid concert. We're going to have a concert, charge people money, and all that money that we charge is going to go right to Ethiopia to help them with their crisis, okay? So That's what they did. It raised $70 million for African famine relief. Yeah, that was great, Live Aid. Really helped. And Live Aid wasn't only the only thing that went to go help those people in Ethiopia, but there was also Heron Aid. Heron Aid. Hey, Heron Aid. I need a Heron Aid. But no, the Hearing Aid was more of the same thing as Live Aid, but it was heavy metal rock bands that came together for that. And then there was Farm Aid, so it's kind of similar, but again, it was like the farmer aspect of helping those people in Ethiopia. And then a big song was written. A big song was written by a joint group of people together, joint group of musicians. And again, they didn't make anything from this song. They didn't profit from the song. What they did from it is the money that they made from it all went towards the famine in Ethiopia. Okay, and that song was called We Are the World. How many people are familiar or remember that? I hope that you are. Remember that one? We are the world. We are the people. We are the ones. Do. Yeah. So that song was very successful at making a lot of money going towards the African famine relief as well. So those are big things going on in the 80s. What I want to finish with here, okay, I'm going to finish with something that's really big too, is we got a big shift in the USA going on as the 80s happens. Okay, big shift in the USA. So we are shifting presidents now, and now the President of the United States of America is Mr. Ronald Reagan. Okay? Everybody probably remembers Ronald Reagan. He was a pretty good president. And this really shifted things in the USA hugely, because what happened was, well, I want to also mention something else that happened before this. We had a stock market crash in 1987, October 1987, Black Monday. So that happened in 1987. That was due again to the bad economy. But yeah, we had that in 87. But back to Ronald Reagan here. Jimmy Carter was the president of the United States before Ronald Reagan. Jimmy Carter was Democratic. Ronald Reagan was Republican. And so Ronald Reagan won the election quite handily over Jimmy Carter when he was up for election. And it was really spoke volumes for what the Americans wanted. It was called the New Right. That's what it was called. So basically, Ronald Reagan was coming onto the scene with a new conservatism. Okay, new conservatism and social, economic, and political policies that he had. So people embraced that because people no longer believed that the Democratic Party represented their interests. And obviously, we went through the 60s and 70s, did we not? Remember everything that was happening? Lots of turbulence, lots of scandal, unrest. There was overcrowding, pollution, starting to be a lot of crime in aging cities. So the Americans said, we need a change. We need to back behind somebody who brings change. And that person was Ronald Reagan. Okay, so it was called the New Right, New Conservatism and Social, Economic, and Political Policies. Okay, and Reagan was also very much against communism, and he fought it. How did he fight it? He fought it by funding countries that were also anti-communism. So Ronald Reagan was a good thing for the U.S. and, as it turns out, a good thing for the world too. Because what I want to share with you as well is, in the 80s as well, there's a new man that comes into charge in the Soviet Union. This was 1987, and here is a key turning point, folks. Breaking news, flashpoint, key turning point, okay? And this was a key turning point in the Cold War. So a new man came in charge of the Soviet Union, Mikhail Gorbachev. What he did is he came in and he said He limited freedoms to the Soviet Union. He restructured the Soviet economy. And he called for an end to censorship. And this was called glasnost. Okay? If you want the Russian term for that, the end of censorship, glasnost. Okay? So he came, he had pretty big different ideas from who was in before him in the Soviet Union, for sure. And another thing that was going on to combine with that is Soviet Union's economy could just not keep up with a capitalist country like the USA and their ability to produce. And it became evident after some time, and especially it even became evident to the residents. More and more residents of these communist nations started to realize their system was failing. Okay? And this was, I'm going to quote this, okay? This is a great quote, okay? So we have Reagan coming in with his kind of radical, different policies that the U.S. hadn't seen previously. You got Gorbachev coming in the Soviet Union with very different policies from what was before him, too. And it was kind of like, let's think about this. Maybe we got two pretty good people in charge of these two big superpower countries. Maybe there's going to be some changes happening. Maybe we're not going to see hostile relations anymore, okay? So, he actually had some meetings with, Reagan had some meetings with Gorbachev, and he actually came flat out, Reagan, in the public light, and he came up with this quote. And I'm gonna say this quote kind of like, I'm gonna try to impersonate Ronald Reagan here, okay? So here's my impersonation of Ronald Reagan. If you seek liberalization, come here to this gate, Mr. Gorbachev. Open this gate, Mr. Gorbachev. Tear down this wall. Okay, that was trying to be my Reagan impersonation, because Reagan was kind of a bit on the quiet side. So that was my impersonation of Ronald Reagan, but he did that. Okay, he said that. He said, if you seek freedom, open this gate, Mr. Gorbachev. Tear down this wall, the Berlin Wall. Okay? And now I want to take you to something special I want to leave you with here to show you, okay? This was actually breaking news that was happening back, 30 years ago at the time, but this was huge news, and I actually got the news report on it. So, what happened was, basically, I'll give you background. Communists were trying to keep control by relaxing restrictions now, okay? Because there was some lashback now, right, as I told you. They were starting to get it. They were starting to think, get it, that communism doesn't work. The economy was not keeping up with the USA. So, communists were trying to keep control by relaxing restrictions, but more and more demonstrations grew every day from people living in these countries and people standing up for the reality of what was going on. So, some restrictions happening, some restrictions starting to be relaxed, and demonstrations growing, and this led to this, okay? I'm just going to bring this up for you. Just bear with me for a second, and I hope that this brings back some memories for you, okay? So, let me just bring this, I'm just going to bring this up for you here. Okay, I hope you can see this, and I hope you get something out of this. This is what happened, and this was November 1989. Pretty big news story coming your way, people. Just be prepared.
At this moment, we are taking you live to the Brandenburg Gate and the Berlin Wall, where hundreds of people have climbed on top of 15 feet of concrete to celebrate the triumph of 28 years of hope.
This is really a scene of happiness. The wall is still standing, as you see, but the wall is political rubble, because today the government of East Germany announced that its borders are open. November 9th, 1989.
This wall has stood for 28 years as the symbol of a divided world, a symbol of oppression. But tonight, East and West Germans have come to the wall to celebrate the end of fear.
How did it come about? What were the pressures that forced this dramatic change? And what's next? Former President Ronald Reagan joins us live tonight.
The changes that have engulfed Eastern Europe have already stirred up the Soviet Union. And tonight we go behind the scenes in the Soviet Parliament to hear the raucous sounds of the new Soviet politics.
What's going on in our country is historic.
Today's events are the fulfillment of a wish.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
Tonight, that wall has all but vanished, and freedom's light is shining. From ABC News, this is Prime Time Live. Now Diane Sawyer and Sam Donaldson.
Good evening and welcome to this special edition of Prime Time Live. It is the sort of news that defies the possibility of a headline. What we know is that we are standing in attendance at a moment in history as you look now at the Berlin Wall. Perhaps the West German foreign minister said it best when he said, "All we can say is that nothing will be as it was before." All day long, we have watched the most extraordinary exchange of hands across a 28-year divide as West Germans helped East Germans climb on top of the wall so that they could celebrate together. For a while, the East German government tried to deter the East Germans by spraying them with water cannons. The water couldn't stop them.
You know, in 1961, when that wall began to be erected in August of that year, it was closing the last gap to freedom in the Iron Curtain, which had been spread across Europe. And now, with the Iron Curtain crumbling, that last wall is crumbling, and the Iron Curtain is probably no more.
Well, you dread proclaiming it too soon. You always wonder what could happen next. And indeed, the Soviet spokesman said today that we shouldn't expect the wall to disintegrate soon, that as long as there is a military difference, that the wall will remain intact. But it's lost its meaning.
It's lost its meaning because everything about the Soviet Empire and the Eastern Bloc has changed. 3 weeks ago, East Germany was still the hardline state, and then the leadership changed. The new leader, Egon Krenz, fired the cabinet. He changed the Politburo. He's declared for free and open democratic elections, and today he's lowered the wall. To talk about this, we're going to talk to a man who must be enormously satisfied today, former President Ronald Reagan, who is in his office in Los Angeles, and in a few minutes will talk to us live about how this all came about and what he sees for the future of Europe and, for that matter, the world. Let's go back to the wall and Don Kladstrup, who's there, shivering at 4 o'clock in the morning. It's cold. Don, tell us about the scene over the last several hours. What's happened?
Oh, it's been just absolutely incredible. I mean, take a look around here. How do you put words on a picture like this? I don't think that there are enough superlatives in the language to really describe it all. I mean, just a few hours ago, you could have been shot for doing what all these people are doing. And now what you hear is the sound of champagne corks and people cheering, and it's just amazing. And I think it's a terribly special feeling to be here. I mean, it's, as you said before, about 4 o'clock in the morning here, and this is a town that's wide awake. It never went to bed. Once it heard the news, it was up, off to the wall, and you know the result.
Well, Don, I think for those of us who have watched that wall over the years, it's always been such a grim place, such a forbidding.
There you have it. So the Berlin Wall didn't fall down in 1989, but it started the fall of the Berlin Wall. So basically, residents could go back and forth with no restrictions at this point. So the wall was open for business, as they would say. So, yeah, that was pretty significant. Pretty big, significant moment in world history, the fall of the Berlin Wall. Now, when we get into the 90s, actually, there's a couple of things that finishes with that. Because when I get into the 90s, I'm going to tell you about the Soviet Union itself crumbling and the Berlin Wall actually physically crumbling as well. But that's significant because that was the turning point, and that was really the starting point of the end of the Cold War between Soviets and the U.S. So that was my history lesson for today. I'm going to get going now because we have maxed our time out. So this has been fun with history. So next week I'm going to take a look at the 80s as well. I'm going to look at a couple of specific events from the 80s next week that happened as well. And that'll be next week when we come back. So that'll be the Big 80s Part 2. Until next week, take care. This has been Professor Banks signing off.